This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. And we have with us artist and scholar Lenore Metrick-Chen. She has an exhibit at the Chinese American Museum of Chicago, CAMOC. And the exhibit is Race Making, American Advertising, Tree Cards, and Chinese Identity. Lenore, we were lucky enough to just slowly walked through your exhibit a couple of months ago, and we
Good.
were just fascinated. We had no idea that they were the businesses were making these cards, these advertising cards. Could you give us a little background because these are almost like baseball cards. How were businesses using these to advertise?
That's a wonderful analogy, Trudy, because the way people collect baseball cards, the advertising cards were collected as well. And at the time, this is probably between 1870 and 1890 that the cards were at their peak. Um, the invention of chromolithography had occurred several decades before and had been pretty much perfected. Now, chromolithography, chroma, of course, refers to color. And so there was now an ability to make a lot of replicas of things in color. And advertisers quickly saw the benefit of doing that. So this was before magazines used color at all in their pages. And so the chromolithographers created huge advertising networks, and a lot of artists were employed to make all sorts of depictions that could possibly please an audience. So what that resulted in was that there were a lot of cards being created, not for specific products, but they would be put into huge books. And then the marketer would go to the business and show them all the possible cards that they could choose from. And they would choose a card that appealed to them. So what happened was most of the cards had nothing to do with the business being advertised.
Oh,
The consumer would just enjoy the picture on one side of the card, and advertising would be on the other side. So most of the businesses used chromolithographic advertising cards in that way.
hmm.
There are some businesses that, specifically Chinese laundries, or Chinese, excuse me, laundry products that would have cards made to order. And these are the ones that would show uh, the benefits of using their product over going to a Chinese laundry. And these cards were meant to be humorous, but of course they demean the Chinese people to show the superiority of a product over a person.
Hmm.
Uh, just to continue a little bit, once the card was made and once the advertiser had chosen the card and it had been stamped with the product on the reverse side, these cards were given away for free. And they would have like newspaper boys, a similar type of thing, giving away cards to all the passerbys, or they would be in a store and you could collect them. And people love them because don't forget, up until chromolithography became uh, uh, perfected, nobody had access to pictures in full color except if you were rich and you could have an oil painting. So now everybody could have a full color image. And so they created trade card albums. And almost every house had at least one trade card album. And somebody in the house would put their cards in any order. They would curate the album. And so these cards got preserved in albums.
Oh.
Uh, and there, most of them do not have Chinese people in them. There were tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of cards, but I collected the ones, and there are, you know, at least 1,000 that have Chinese people in them.
Mhm. When you mentioned that the Chinese laundry, did those products uh, were used were used for laundry, and then it was to contrast how they could use their product instead of having to go to a Chinese laundry, and then they would have the depiction of Chinese people on the other side of the card. What was that again?
Oh, so some of the laundry products
Uh-huh.
would have their advertising on on the
Mm,
opposite side of the card of the picture,
mm,
but they'd also have their advertising integrated with the image on the card. And the
mm,
image would often be somewhat political in that a lot of the laundry products made use of the fact that Chinese were being excluded in more and more until 1882. And then, of course, the Chinese Exclusion Act was finalized in 1882. It was supposed to be for 10 years. And
mm,
instead, it got continued until the 1940s when
mm,
China became our ally, the US ally in World War II. And then we suddenly thought, oh, we better not exclude our ally. But I laugh, but it's not really funny. Um, so the cards would show a picture of Chinese people. They were meant to be funny. It would be a cartoony picture of Chinese people getting into wash tubs and sailing over the ocean back to China. And there would be writing on the card that would let you know back to China. And it would have Chinese people talking in pidgin English, um, sobbing that they had to leave the US and go back to China. Some of the cards have a depiction in the foreground of a man named Denis Kearney, who was a California leader of the anti-Chinese movement.
mm.
And so they have a kind of a portrait of him in the front and all these Chinese people getting into their wash tubs and leaving. And then it would also say um, something about the product, something about the benefits of the type of product they were selling.
Mm. The American people were upset that the Chinese people were taking away their jobs. What was the hostility, or just the skin color, just because the Chinese people were not white?
That's really complex. Of course, there was a lot of anti-Chinese sentiment, but what um, research is showing more and more is that, well, I don't know, it wasn't necessarily the general public that took a dislike to Chinese people. In fact, most Americans outside of California and Seattle, places like that, the West, Colorado, had never seen a Chinese person. And there's a recorded conversations in the newspapers and so on where white Americans say to a Chinese person that they see for the first time, "What are you? Are you Indian? Are you?" They don't know what a Chinese person is. So it would have been hard for them to be racist against Chinese when they didn't even know Chinese people.
Mm.
And in fact, the Chinese were such a small percentage in the United States outside of those Western states.
About
So
what was the percentage at the time? Was it even under 1%?
it was, yes. Yeah. And so I believe that the anti-Chinese sentiment was created not from the bottom up, not from people being against Chinese people, white people being against Chinese people, but from a political reason. Of course, there were people like Denis Kearney who felt that the Chinese people were taking away the jobs that had been held by the Irish. And the saying is, they were fighting them because the stakes were so low. But that wasn't why exclusion happened. Exclusion happened because Kearney was able to create enough animosity and violence that people started in those Western states to think that it would be good to be anti-Chinese. So why did all the other states in the eastern portion of the United States go along with this and create exclusion? It was because it was a very tight presidential race in the 1880s. And both sides needed the electoral votes to win. And California, I believe, had 6 electoral votes at the time, which would really be a tremendous coup for either side. So both Democrats and Republicans said that they acted very weary. Oh, we have to capitulate to the demands of California, and we have to exclude the Chinese. They made it seem as if they were reluctant to do it, but they were doing it because California wanted them to. In reality, they were doing it because they wanted to convince California to vote for their party.
So, in other words, they were currying favor from the Californians because they saw that the Californians were heavily influenced by Kearney, and then they figured that if they were to exclude the Chinese, they would win votes from the Californians.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mm.
Yeah. So Chinese exclusion wasn't necessarily something like now, I think, because we have so much more media coverage of immigration and so much uh, more dissemination of hostility and r reasons for that hostility made up, no doubt. Um, there is more of a tendency to believe that immigration is bad per, um, in this country. It's so hostile, and I'm not saying that it wasn't hostile against the Chinese. Chinese people were lynched for being Chinese, but again, it wasn't across the entire nation. Whereas now, uh, there's so much media saying that immigration is bad that everyone kind of gets brainwashed into thinking there must be something wrong with it.
Mm.
So,
Very timely.
mhm.
Um, How did you even find this topic? Did you have some relatives or friends that showed you some of these cards? It's not commonly known about these cards. We were just so fascinated when we went through your exhibit.
Uh, I started being interested in the topic of Chinese exclusion because I fell in love with a Chinese American man, and I didn't know anything about Chinese American history. And so I was working, just beginning to do research for a dissertation topic at the University of Chicago. And I started to become interested in something that was, why did Chinese exclusion happen? And at the same time that the newly founded art museums like the Met and the Boston Museum of Art were collecting Chinese art. And so what did they see in the art that they loved and thought was good enough to put in a museum when they didn't want the people? And as I was researching that, the eBay came out and it was very new. And so I thought it would be great if I could find some pictures of Chinese people from the 19th century to help illustrate my dissertation. And up popped a trade card, and it had a drawing of a Chinese person and an advertisement. And I thought, oh, that's not at all what I was looking for. But it stuck in my head, that card and that image. And it seemed like it was the same type of question that I was asking about art. Why are they using a Chinese person to advertise a product? Why would that appeal to people, to the mass audience? And why did that appeal to the person who was advertising their product? So I started looking for more of these cards, and at antique stores, wherever I went, I would look for these cards. And I think I'm the only person in history who has ever said to my dissertation advisors, they said, "Oh, you're done. Your dissertation is finished." And I said, "Would you mind if I write another chapter on the trade cards?" So that's how it all came about. And in my research, I found that the trade cards go beyond uh, a simple duality of white people, Chinese people, and that the Chinese were used as an image, as a metaphor, as a sign of other possibilities in in American culture. In one thing, for instance, is gender roles had been very, very patriarchal, and that had been insisted upon as much as possible. Well, of course, we know that gender is much more fluid and can't be put in these strict categories. Chinese immigration and Chinese images, even on trade cards, allowed a different way of thinking about gender, a different way of thinking about family relationships, about uh, male-female relationships. And so,
How so?
well, for one thing, Chinese people couldn't get traditional, well, let me back up. A lot of Chinese people came to look for gold during the gold rush and stayed or came, were recruited by American railroad builders to work on the railroad. So, on the one hand, the Chinese are doing this incredibly physical, hard labor, just like the traditional male stereotype. On the other hand, they're drinking tea out of dainty cups. This was often commented on. So there was this mixing of the traditional idea of what feminine was with what masculinity was. And it confused Americans. Then Chinese workers, again, male, which is a whole other story why men were here and not women. But Chinese male workers were not allowed to do a lot of traditional American jobs. And so they were in the West, what was missing was people to do women's work, do the laundry, do the cooking, clean in the house. So Chinese men were hired to do that, and they worked in houses with women. And so they had a very different relationship with women than white males would. And again, were they safe to leave in the house with white women? And there's a divided idea. On the one hand, Chinese men were often presented as lewd and lascivious. And on the other hand, they were friends to women and they were feminized. And so one extreme or the other. But in either case, they shook up what male identity had been previously. And they allowed uh, men who did want to explore other options a way to think about it that hadn't been there previously.
So at that time, they didn't even know about the Chinese opera in which uh, females would actually sing male parts.
Males sing female parts.
Uh, Yeah, that too. Because we do have a very famous Chinese opera singer. She is a female, and then she sings the male parts. But
I
that,
didn't know that at
uh,
all.
yeah, that was like during the 60s to the 90s. I'm not sure how what her Americanized name is. When I find out, I'll send it to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd
Yeah.
love to learn more about that. Yeah, because I know in traditional Chinese opera, the men do the women's parts.
Mhm. Right.
And that's really interesting because one of the things that has dropped out of our consciousness is that in the 1880s, 90s, and turn of the century to 1900s, the most highly paid performers were two men who did female roles
Mhm.
in, and these are white men doing female roles in plays or stand-up comics kind of thing. And it was considered great entertainment, and people would bring their families to watch these female impersonators.
So were these two men impersonating Chinese men, impersonating women, or they were just white men impersonating women?
There were white men, and these two in particular were white men impersonating white women,
Okay.
but there were also white men impersonating Chinese people. One of the most famous magicians of that same time period in the late 1890s, 1900s was a white man who impersonated a Chinese man and presented himself as Chinese. People didn't even know he was white.
Mm.
So there was a lot of crossing boundaries. And I think, again, you see that in the trade cards. You see it in a few of the trade cards. There's, in particular, there was a white man from England named Oscar Wilde, and he was very famous as a wit, as a writer, uh, wrote very amazing plays and also penetrating essays. And he preferred men uh, for sexual partner. And he came to the United States, interestingly enough, in 1882, the same year as Chinese exclusion law was uh, finalized and or nationalized. And he um, he had trademarks. He had a certain way of standing, and he had a sunflower that was associated with him. Well, a series of trade cards was created that were caricatures based on Oscar Wilde, but showing other identities as Oscar Wilde. For instance, there's Uncle Sam, and Uncle Sam is presented as an Oscar Wilde figure. And
In the U.S. Mascot Uncle Sam, that
that's right,
okay.
exactly. Another trade card, which is to the point here, is a Chinese man was presented as Oscar Wilde. And these, again, were created in a series, and they would have been shown to prospective purchasers, or sellers of products, and the seller could pick anyone that they wanted and put their product on the reverse side of the image.
Did the business owner have to pay for the privilege of putting their advertising on the
That's
back
right.
of? Yes. Mhm.
They
That
would
was
buy that, and in this card that had a Chinese caricature of Oscar Wilde, it the top has writing that says in pidgin English,
mhm,
no, don't call, I'll just say it in real English, don't call me Johnny, call me Oscar,
mhm,
because Chinese people were often called John or Johnny.
mhm.
And so, and instead of holding a sunflower, he's holding a sunflower that's, the petals are actually rats. And so it's,
What does that mean?
and there was a way of demeaning people by uh, saying terrible things about what they eat. And we
Uh-huh.
still see that to this day. And so the idea was that Chinese people eat rats and dogs and cats. We've seen that recently with Haitian immigrants being um, categorized that way and lied about. So, so it's these cards again were meant to be mashups of racist ideas presented in a funny way, uh, sort of tongue-in-cheek, as if the person making it knew better, but was still complicit. It's again a very it, it's racism, obviously, and it's also trying to say we know better by exaggerating the racism. It's it's complicated.
And it was meant to be entertainment at that, totally.
Right.
Then what happened to make these cards fade out was I think that their fading out wasn't because of the Chinese people, because it was like you said that there are only very few cards that depicted the Chinese people. So what happened first? Did the popularity of the cards fade out first, or did the pictures of the Chinese people in a demeaning way, did it ever fade out, or did the cards faded out, but the stereotypes were still there?
Yeah, so you're I think asking, did the stereotypes outlast the cards? Is that
Yes,
kind of what you're
that's
asking?
very succinct. Yes.
So yes, the cards faded out because magazines agreed or decided that they would use color images, and they started advertising um, more, and people found that to be a better way of disseminating their products.
Mhm.
So the cards themselves had their heyday and then were no longer the best media for advertising. At the same time, the idea of Chinese was, hmm, it still remained as complex because I haven't really talked about, there were cards that depicted Chinese people in aesthetic ways. They product for paint, somebody who wanted to sell their paint product showed a Chinese person as a butterfly. Chinese people were depicted as magicians, as wise men. I mean, there were a range of images of Chinese that
Yes,
were,
shades of Charlie Chan, that was very it's very stereotypical. Plus, Charlie Chan was depicted as a wise detective. Not Charlie Chan. Who was that? Not Charlie Chan. There was this old detective series with that
no, Charlie Chan was the right person.
it was
Yeah,
right. Okay.
yeah, yeah. And these were, of course, that was later, and that was again during another surge of anti-immigration in the
Mhm.
United States, in the 30s, I believe, or even
Mhm.
later.
Mhm.
But but one of the things that looking at the trade cards really brought out to me was the wide range of ideas of Chinese people by people who had never met them or seen Chinese people. There was just an idea of Chinese-ness or Chinese. And they, it wasn't all negative. Like if you read the newspapers of the same time, the from 1870 to 1882, the written image of the Chinese people in the newspaper had started off pretty positive for the most part in New York. Um, and then gradually it starts to become more negative as the politicians and the sentiment capitulates to the California idea and um, they want the California vote, as I said.
Mhm.
But the images circulating among all the people who collect trade cards, among the common people, let's say, uh, they have all these different variations. Again, the negative ones really strike us the most because they're so horrific, with the rats and those things that, again, were meant to be funny, but are certainly horrible.
What were the positive ones like then, if there were positive ones?
So, as I said, the positive ones usually aestheticize the Chinese people and see them as wise, as having like um, magical abilities, floating in the air, flying like a butterfly, being on a magic carpet, having scrolls in front of them that they can read. So like it was again not usually a day-to-day depiction of a Chinese person from real life, but a fantasy, but it was more positive fantasy,
Mhm.
although it still wasn't, like I said, anything but fantasy.
So you came across a lot of cards. Were other races also demeaned in those advertising cards? I know that you were seeking out the Chinese ones, but were other races similarly demeaned in those advertising cards, trade cards?
Yeah, what passed for humor in that time was so much more harsh
Mhm.
and broad.
Not politically correct, in other words.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And so there's cards with black people that make you cringe, but then there's cards with black people that do show more of a daily life or a handsome black person, uh, just like almost a portrait. So you get again a range of ways of seeing different ethnic groups. Um, Occasionally, it's harder to define if a person is Jewish or not, but you do get cards with stereotypical Jewish features that are quite recognizable, and they often, some have to do with money, again, a demeaning stereotype. Others have to do with the job of, like a tailor will often be depicted as Jewish. And that's because that's the type of job that Jews were able to do at that time. Irish people appear. And so, yeah, um, I didn't, I didn't try to collect other
Mhm. I understand.
ethnicities,
I understand.
but
But you
yeah.
must have come across so many of them.
Yeah, yeah. Everyone was fair game for the
Mhm.
people making the cards because you want your creation to stand out and you want it to be chosen so that you make a little money.
But in other words, they thought that that would be appealing. So, in other words, do you think that the common person on the street was thinking like that, or it was just like the creators were making a movie that they hope was entertaining, and evidently it was, and then they continued it. Which way was it? Did it?
Yeah.
Like you said, top down, right?
Uh, Top down, and also I think it was both things that you're talking about. I think that people were looking for subjects that would be entertaining, uh, and certainly I've seen trade card albums that are intact, and like a whole page will be beautiful aesthetic images, including the aesthetic Chinese. So they're not segregated out into a different section. They're part of, a page that's about flowers and, beautiful colors.
Mhm.
So it
Yeah.
really was in the hands of the observer as well, how
Mhm.
they saw the cards and how they grouped them.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of, oh,
How are the ones that were that depicted the Chinese people? usually grouped? Does it vary widely, or did you see a pattern of how people would group the Chinese cards?
It varies a lot of times, and I haven't seen a lot of intact albums,
Hmm.
but I have seen the ones I just described, and also I've seen pages that will put all the laundry cards together.
Hmm.
So, they'll do it by subject matter or something like that.
Hmm. When the advertising changed to magazines, were Chinese people still fair game for depictions in magazine ads as well?
Well, the whole approach to advertising became much more what we would be familiar with
Okay.
because the trade cards were like as I said, chromolithography was very new, and it felt like suddenly there was almost a riot of images in color, and everyone could own one of them. It was a very visually exciting time, and as I said, the cards. There was no reason to make a card have much to do with the product. And in fact, I've collected several cards that are duplicates, except for the product that they're advertising.
Mm.
So two
Oh.
different manufacturers or three, and obviously much more, were attracted to the same card and used it for their product.
Mm.
Now, when magazines came out, you might say that advertising was rationalized and it became not this wild west of images, but it became show my product in
Okay.
this picture.
Mhm.
And so all that kind of display went away. And it became, you know, people eating the food they were advertising or using the utensils or so on.
Mhm. So you've collected so many cards and you've thought out your exhibit. Could you tell me what is your favorite card first? There's a couple of questions in that lane, in that line.
I do, my dissertation became a book, and here's a plug. It's called Collecting Objects, Excluding People. And uh, as I mentioned, similar to the dissertation, I have a chapter on the trade cards. And the last image in the book is my favorite one. And it's of a Chinese person, in Chinese clothing as an American might imagine it. And it's on a buff colored cardstock. So it's not full color, it's just a buff colored cardstock with a drawing of this Chinese person. And the Chinese person is walking by a statue. It's like walking in a park, and there's a statue. And I assume that that statue is supposed to be Buddha. And it's very humorous because it's obviously not somebody who has seen Buddha, a statue, but it's really lovely. It looks like the Chinese person is walking calmly through a beautiful setting and it carries some of the culture with him, even though it's an American card. And I like all the different factors that come into that card.
Such as just a
Oh,
couple.
yeah, just like I said, having the Buddha there, having the Chinese person dressed comfortably, the kind of a natural park-like setting,
Mhm.
and that it's an American creating a very positive image of how they see
Mhm.
a Chinese person.
What were they selling on the other side of the card?
I forgot.
Oh, that's
And
okay.
you know what? Actually have two of that card, and both of them are selling different products,
Mhm.
but I don't remember what the products were.
No, no worries. What was the most horrific card that you would say that you came across?
That's very easy. It's an oversized card. Most of the cards were made deliberately. I don't know if you know the type of photography that was available at the time, or calling cards. But the photography called it carte de visite or a CDV, was palm size. I'll hold my hand. It was like, something smaller than a baseball card and narrower. And they would also have that same cardstock be used for calling cards. If you went to somebody's house, you'd leave your card. Very much a little bit bigger than a business card. So most of the trade cards are roughly around that size. And this card is oversized. It's about the size of my hand. And it's advertising a product called Rough on Rats. And this is a poison to get rid of rats. Well, somebody thought that would be very humorous to use the idea of getting rid of rats with the idea of Chinese exclusion. So they created an image that is about let's get rid of them, with an ambiguity of who they're getting rid of, because the image is the thing that really is terrible. It's in, I'd say, full color, and it's showing a side view of a Chinese man looking up and holding uh, a rat dangling from his fingers that are uh, the rat is hovering right above his open mouth, or right above his mouth. And so the idea is getting rid of somebody who eats rats, and getting rid of rats, and getting rid of Chinese, all um, all together in this image.
Did you have a chance to study the artist? For instance, the artist that made that depiction, were all of his depictions the same vein, very negative?
There's no way, well, I don't know any way of knowing who did these images.
Oh, they don't have a signature, and
They do not have a
uh,
signature.
mhm.
So people would be hired and they would just make images. One of the things, though, well, we don't know who made the images. These images became hugely influential on later artists that we do know. And I don't think that people have recognized this. Even art historians don't uh, give the advertisers, the artists,
They're doomed.
yeah, they don't give them credit. But the um, there were so many cards. The idea was to make as many images as possible so that the product, or the person wanting their product placed, would have as many choices as possible.
Mhm.
So that's why the cards range. Some of them are like beautiful artworks that you would hang in your home. Some of them, as the one I described that I like the most, is a sketch kind of a artwork. Some of them are very surreal, and they have puzzles on them, or they have things that are uncanny, like a woman that's turning into a radish, and again, crossing all these boundaries. Well, this was happening in the 1880s in trade cards and advertising, but it didn't happen in the art world until the 1920s with Surrealism. And so the Surrealist artists started doing these compilation, the idea of a person and a bug, and, things that don't go together in uh, something that we would see in real life. But the trade card artists get no credit, but they were the ones who really uh, kind of were allowed to be looser. They didn't have to follow the Western canon of what was proper imagery.
And then they influenced the surrealists, then, you think?
Yeah, I do think so, because I think that there were enough trade cards in the world, and also some of the what I did say that that magazine advertising became more rationalized, but they also had images like this as well. So there was a time period when both kind of coexisted. And
Mhm.
I think that would be the time period when the surrealist generation was growing up, and they probably were looking at these things and, very influenced.
So when you look at the surreal art, a lot of the surreal art, do you see that pattern of these advertising cards in their images?
Yeah, and that kind of surreal means above reality, over reality. So it's
Exaggerated.
yeah.
Mhm.
And so it's a way of um, not sticking to a kind of camera
Mhm.
photographic way of depicting things. And it's much more, no, I was going to say the wrong thing. It's not more imaginative. It's just, it takes the imagination in a different direction
Mhm.
towards possibilities of what things can be rather than, um,
What they are.
yeah, trying to show what you already see. Um, so I think that the surrealists were very influenced by that kind of imaginary pathway.
Who else do you think was influenced by these advertising cards?
Mhm. I'm, you mean besides artists?
Anyone, because it seems as if it was a body of work that's gone unrecognized, and since it was in vogue for so many decades, they must have had an influence on a lot of people growing up. They grew up with these cards.
Yeah, well, I can't say how much influence it had. I have never
Uh,
um,
Gone into studying.
heard. The one thing I know is in A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by
Yes.
Mark Twain,
Mhm.
he does write that one of the things he missed was chromo. He and he said whether or not it had advertising on it, he missed it hanging, in everyone's house. So now he was probably talking about a larger chromo, but he also says they had advertising on them too,
Yeah,
or they
good.
could. And so I think that people were influenced by the idea that they could own these um,
Artworks, almost
yeah,
could
artwork.
be considered artwork. Yes.
Yeah. And I think that um, I don't know that they were so influenced by the politics of them. You know, they were they just came in multiples, and there were so many of them that
Mhm.
it would be hard to be like, oh, that card made me see things a different way. But I think having these access to the artworks was very influential on people.
So in the end, your dissertation, was it just a chapter or two in your dissertation about these cards, or did you ever start another research project that was solely uh, focused on these cards?
In my book, Collecting Objects, Excluding People,
Mhm.
it's one chapter of four. And the subtitle of that is Chinese Subjects and American Visual Culture,
Mhm.
19th Century. So that, is a fourth of the book.
Mhm.
But I am working on another way of talking about the cards. And in the book, I really focused on American visual culture and the cards as an expression of that, and how they were part of uh, a way of thinking of Chinese people. But I didn't get into issues of race per se. And now I think I'm really ready to talk about something more along the lines of the exhibit itself, which is called race making.
Mhm.
And I want to write more about how race is a construction. And so these cards had so much to do with showing, not influencing people's idea of race so much as already showing how white people were thinking about Chinese people and how they created a Chinese American uh, race, basically, that would that had never existed before. I mean, Chinese people in China didn't think of themselves as a race, and a race is very much a Western way of thinking of peoples. And so when Chinese people started to come to the United States, white people here had a hard time, as I said, figuring out how they wanted to define what the Chinese race was going to be to them. And it's still a work in progress, as you know. There's always, race is always changing, and the ways people in power try to pigeonhole other people's is always changing.
Mhm. So would you say that, of course, racism is racism, but when we talk about race, is that usually like the beginnings of racism? If there weren't racism, what we talk about race?
Yeah, I think I think that's a really subtle question. I think that race, I've read various authors who theorize that race is racism,
Mhm.
that thinking in terms of race immediately creates a difference and a hierarchy. And when I see their arguments, I understand that, and I can see that that's, to me, part of the very problem of thinking in terms of race. As I said, race is a construction, and it it leads to thinking hierarchically. It's meant to. It was created to create. It was created by white people, white males especially, and that's why white males are on the top of the racial hierarchy. I
Mhm.
mean,
At the
there's
top
no
of the
doubt
totem
about that.
pole. Mhm.
And so I think our country is struggling with trying to figure out how to get out from under this web of racialized thinking. And again, visualization is basically what race is based on. It used to be people had ideas, oh, you have blood, racial blood, and that became too confusing. And now it's basically based on color. And that is very confusing too, because uh, my children I've been asked, what race they are. People want to categorize them. If they're Hawaiian, if they're Mexican, you can't tell by looking what somebody is necessarily. And I think the impulse to want to do that doesn't come from a very good place.
Mhm. Speaking of blood types that run across ethnicities.
Right, right.
And
There's there's no DNA difference. There's no even people who feel that like certain diseases are associated more with certain races. That's an argument that's used, but it, it really isn't about the race. It's about the location uh, in geography, the geographical location where certain diseases arose. So it's not about race. There's no internal way of
Mhm.
saying what a race is.
Mhm. How do we separate race from culture? Remember, you mentioned one of the cards was rather respectful. It had the Chinese man walking in the park with the Buddha statue in the background. So, how could we separate culture from race and then uh, be respectful? Where do we start? Is what I'm trying to say.
Let me try and collect my thoughts for a minute on this.
You're the perfect person to ask. I've always wanted to understand this question, and then I've never found anyone to ask it, but I found you.
Well, I hope I can start an answer because
Okay.
um, I I think race is very dangerous
Mhm.
to pigeonhole people into race, and I I think our society has benefited from doing that and continues to benefit. So I think one of the there's two pathways, at least two major ones, and one is the people who are profiting from maintaining racial distinctions or what they allege are
Racial,
racial
racial
distinctions.
divides, yes. Hmm.
Yeah. They, the power structure has to change. People have to resist that mythology. And that would require changing a lot about how finances work, our economy is structured. And that gets to the second way, which is as individuals. And I think people have said this for generations, and now at least this each generation seems to say it in their own way, but we have to stand together and not allow uh, a particular people to be turned into a kind of caricature of race. You know, we have to see people individually. And one of the things that still doesn't happen enough is a lot of people I know like white people that I know really do care that things should be fairer and that they don't want uh, racism and they want less violence or no violence against other races. And they'll maybe go have to a protest movement. But the question really becomes, as an individual, do you seek out people who are um, not considered the same race as you? Do you get to know people individually? Do you have friends? Do you try to cross those borders yourself rather than just wait for those borders to be crossed uh, by politics or social or culture? And so, each person can ask themselves, how many friends do I have that's outside my family kind of comfort group, my extended family, and work at, you know, changing your own life to be available for others. Does that make sense?
Very much so. In other words, an everyday citizen or an everyday voter could become a leader and lead by example.
Yeah. And I'm also having a hard time with the word leader for other reasons.
Mm.
Everyone is like, learn to be a leader. I I don't know that it has to be a leader. It has to be more not looking outward towards, I'll show other people how to act,
Mhm.
but what is the right thing to do? How do you do that? And it often isn't easy to make those initial steps, to go places that don't have, for instance, if you're white, to have a lot of white people and not be there just as an observer or a curiosity or something like that. But spend time. It takes time to have friends. So that's one of the things that I think needs to be um, done more. And I
Yeah.
don't even know, I'm thinking now, I don't know if this could be done in schools, but I know when I went through school, from grade school to college, people often were in their own group according to what race they were. And when I was in a dormitory, Black people sat at one table, white people sat at another table. And every once in a while, somebody would cross over. And I know there was a lot of delight when people change places a little bit.
Mhm.
You know, I was in a particular dorm. It seemed like people were very open to that. So that might have been the initial thing, and it did persist, but there eventually was much more crossover.
Well, you did the crossover. I think you married a Chinese man.
Chinese American man, yeah.
Yes.
But that's because he's so wonderful. He was like, oh, I just felt like I hadn't met somebody who saw things so clearly. And he's an artist, and his artwork took me by surprise. It was like nothing, it is still like nothing I would have ever imagined. And so I like that a lot. I like um, when somebody is thinking, we think a lot along the same lines, but we see it differently too. And
That's beautiful.
yeah, I feel very fortunate. And it's opened up a whole other way of experiencing the world that, to me, I think I haven't traveled much. We don't have a whole lot of money to go, to all different places, but my life here is so different than it would have been had I not been part of a Chinese American family.
Mhm. Well, we'll have to interview your husband as well, I think.
Huh, that would be wonderful. Yeah.
Well, Lenore Metrick-Chen, if our listeners want to learn more about you and where they could view your exhibit and also where they could find your book, where should they go?
Unfortunately, the exhibit has come down from the Chinese American Museum in Chicago. So
Mhm.
that's not up, but I am hoping that it will soon travel to another venue. And I'll let you know,
Please.
Trudy, as soon as and then you can tell your listeners. Um, they are also working on a catalog of the show, and it will have many, many of the trade cards in the catalog. Uh, the third place they can learn more about the subject is, of course, my book, which I've mentioned, Collecting Objects, Excluding People. And that's probably available online. Uh, it's from SUNY Press. If they want to learn more about me, uh, they could read the back of the book. Contact me if they want to. I'd be glad to hear from anyone.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Lenore Metrick-Chen, for joining us and imparting a lot of wisdom and so many details about your work. Thank you.
Tru-
And thank you for your work as well.
Thank you, Trudy, for inviting me. This has been a real pleasure talking with you, and I appreciate your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Lenore.
Bye, Trudy.
Bye.